Fourth roll calls. This broadcast is based on a report showing how all United States senators and representatives voted on 25 key roll calls on such issues as federal aid to education, federal water pollution control, foreign aid, federal subsidies to the fishing industry. When members of Congress vote for such proposals, they are voting for programs which violate the Constitution, because our Constitution does not authorize such activities. No matter how admirable the intent of such programs, when we support the federal government in activities for which it has no constitutional authority, we are supporting lawless government, which will eventually become total dictatorship. There is something that the people can do about this if they will watch how their representatives vote in Congress. That is a summary of my report on fourth roll calls. The full report after a message from my sponsor. During the year 1963, I tabulated, in the published report on which my broadcasts are based, key roll call votes in the National Congress. Here are issues covered in my fourth tabulation of roll calls for the first session of the 88th Congress. International Coffee Agreement. The Senate ratified an international agreement or treaty which, in effect, empowers an international cartel to control prices and shipments of coffee throughout the world. The treaty guarantees large annual coffee sales for communist Cuba, while denying guarantees to Japan and nationalist China. In November, the House passed a bill to implement the coffee agreement for 2 years. Manpower training. On September 4, 1963, the Senate approved a bill extending the unconstitutional manpower training program for 2 years and increasing the cost to $326 million. 2 days later, the Senate approved another bill extending the manpower program and authorizing another $100 million. Aid to education. On September 12, 1963, the Senate passed a bill authorizing unlimited funds for loans to medical students and $175 million for grants to construct medical school facilities. Both Senate and House, after much maneuvering, passed another federal aid to education bill in December. This one increased annual authorization for grants to state and local vocational schools from $57 million to $243 million. 2, expanded the scope of vocational educational activities. 3, extended the National Defense Education Act for another 2 years. And 4, extended for another 2 years the program of federal aid to schools in federally impacted areas where large numbers of federal personnel, civilian or military, create special school problems. And of course, all federal aid to education is unconstitutional. Disarmament Agency. On November 20, 1963, the House passed a bill authorizing a 100% increase in Disarmament Agency funds for the next 2 years. The controversial Test Ban Treaty, which the Senate ratified in September, was one of the first fruits of the Disarmament Agency's activities. Fishing boat construction. On October 2, 1963, the Senate passed a bill extending subsidies for the construction of new fishing boats for another 5 years. This program was initiated during the Eisenhower administration as a result of financial difficulties encountered by American fishermen because of heavy competition from foreign nations, especially Japan. And of course, foreign aid caused the competitive problem in the first place. Civil Rights Commission. In October 1963, the Senate voted to extend the life of the Civil Rights Commission for 1 year. This extension was in the form of an amendment, or rider, by Senator Everett Dirksen to a private bill. The rider technique prohibited the House from taking a separate vote on the Civil Rights Commission question. Hence, the life of the Civil Rights Commission was extended without specific approval of the House of Representatives. Water Pollution Agency. On October 16, 1963, the Senate passed a bill establishing a federal water pollution control agency. This legislation authorizes the Secretary of Health, Education, and Welfare to issue regulations and to obtain court orders compelling states to comply with his regulations. Foreign aid. In August 1963, the House passed the Foreign Assistance Act of 1963, authorizing $3.5 billion in foreign aid for the coming fiscal year. In the Senate, efforts were made to amend the act before it was passed. Senator Frank Lausche proposed an amendment to prevent the President from continuing to give most favored nations tariff treatment to Communist Yugoslavia and Communist Poland. The Senate rejected the Lausche amendment, but adopted an amendment proposed by Senator Hubert Humphrey, exempting the Peace Corps and the Cultural Exchanges Program from any restrictions imposed by Congress on any other foreign aid activities. On November 15, 1963, the Senate passed its revised version of the Foreign Aid Bill, authorizing $3.7 billion, $200 million more than the House had authorized in August. By mid-December 1963, both houses had agreed on a general foreign aid bill, but were still locked in controversy over appropriations to implement the bill. If the voters of America will find out how their representatives and senators vote on foreign aid and continue making their views felt, this particular unconstitutional squandering of the taxpayers' money can be stopped. District of Columbia Welfare. In November 1963, Senator Abraham Ribicoff sponsored an administration effort to extend general federal public welfare assistance programs to the District of Columbia. The Senate rejected this move primarily because of recent disclosures about corruption and abuse in the District of Columbia welfare programs. Data processing. A House bill authorized the General Services Administration to purchase and maintain all data processing equipment used by all federal agencies. Primary opposition to this bill resulted from security considerations. With all classified data controlled by one agency, a security leak in that agency could endanger all classified secrets of the federal government. For these reasons, such agencies as the National Aeronautics and Space Administration were opposed. The bill was also opposed on grounds of economy. United States Representative Joe Poole of Texas noted that the bill does not provide for competitive bidding. The Comptroller General testified that the government is already losing millions of dollars a year by negotiating contracts for data processing machines instead of purchasing them through the process of competitive bids. Nonetheless, the House approved the bill, although many agencies and departments affected had not been given an opportunity to testify during hearings. House Resolution 314 would have authorized a trip by Roman L. Pusinski and 4 other members of the Subcommittee on Education and Labor to go to Moscow for a study of the Soviet Union's data processing center. The purpose of the proposed trip was to get information which might encourage Congress to finance a similar data processing center for the United States. The House refused to authorize Mr. Pusinski's trip to Moscow. National Science Foundation. On November 20, 1963, the Senate defeated an administration effort to increase funds for the National Science Foundation by $49,800,000. Mental health funds. On September 10, 1963, the House passed a bill authorizing $238 million for a 3-year program of federal aid to construct local mental health centers and research facilities and to train teachers for the mentally retarded. The House passed the bill in October. The tax cut. In September 1963, the House passed the tax cut bill, which later became stalled in the Senate. Although it would presumably lower some personal and corporation income taxes, the tax cut bill would raise taxes on many lower and middle income individuals. A main conservative objection to the bill is that it reduces revenue without reduction in spending, thus causing more deficit financing and increasing the debt. Control of history. In October 1963, the House authorized $500,000 a year for 5 years to federal agencies, state and local agencies, and to non-profit organizations for the collecting, describing, editing, and publishing of documentary sources significant to the history of the United States. United States Representative Richard Poff of Virginia, arguing that such scholastic projects should be financed privately, said the bill confers upon federal agencies the power to rewrite the history of this country. The national debt. In November 1963, the House authorized the third temporary increase in the national debt during 1963, this time to $315 billion. A subway for the District of Columbia. In December 1963, the House, by a wide margin, rejected an administration effort to authorize a publicly owned subway rail transit system for the city of Washington. The project would have required direct federal expenditures of $120 million and federal underwriting of $258,900,000 in bonds. All who order copies of this broadcast will receive the complete record of how every United States senator and representative voted on such programs and proposals as I have just mentioned briefly. When members of the National Congress vote for such programs as federal aid to education, federal water pollution control, foreign aid, federal subsidies to the fishing industry, they are voting for unconstitutional programs because our Constitution does not grant the federal government power to engage in such activities. No matter how much you may approve of the intent of such programs or admire the people who sponsor them, when you support the federal government in activities for which it has no constitutional authority, you are supporting lawless government which will become dictatorship. Americans who want lawful government should study the voting records of their elected representatives and act accordingly. Goodbye. God bless you. For the documented text of this broadcast, send 25 cents to Dan Smoot, Dallas 14, Texas, and ask for 436. Fourth roll calls. 6 copies, $1.